Welcome to everyone tuning in, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Julia Bates, and I'll be taking over for Chris for the time being. Now, if you're new to the program, this is The Great Divide, where we seek to reconcile some of the greatest rifts of all human history. Now, of course, this is easier said than done, but nonetheless, we do our best to represent both sides equally. This means that each person will attempt to view the argument from the other person's perspective, and then hopefully by the end of the discussion, they will find common ground. Now, we've invited today Dr. Cyrus M. Harwood, a former clergy member of the Roman Catholic Church who remains a firm believer of the Christian faith. Now, with that said, some of his more hardline positions have softened as he continues to re-examine his own beliefs. We also have DIANE STRAUM, a self-proclaimed atheist who is currently pursuing a master's degree. She believes that there are no right or wrong answers when it comes to the matters of religion. Now, we've invited both of our guests here for one goal, and that is to find as much common ground as possible between atheists and believers. Now, Dr. Harwood, DIANE, thank you so much for coming to join us. I understand that you are both very busy people.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I would like to just dive on into the topic. And for those of you listening at home, you have been warned, we will be discussing aliens. Okay, so in religions all over the world, we have some sort of supernatural or spiritual realm that extends beyond human normal perception. Now, in most cases, we also have supernatural beings in the form of one or more gods who not only play a crucial role in our creation, but also in our everyday lives. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to sit here and go through a long list of all of the belief systems because of time constraints. So I would like to focus on the largest and oldest religions in this episode. So, the first thing that comes to the top of my head is Judaism, because it has one of the most well-known origin stories of all time. So, Dr. Harwood, how does it begin?
That's a good question. And I'll start off by saying this. The scientific community seems to agree that the universe could have in fact come from nothing, a concept that nearly half of the population seems to agree with. But let me start off by asking you a question. What's your favorite movie?
I guess I'm gonna go with V for Vendetta.
Okay. And how much time would you say that passes in the movie? A couple days, weeks, months?
Well, the main character's journey takes months, whereas the masked individual's takes a bit longer.
Okay, so time moves differently for you than it does in the movie. Would that be correct in saying that?
Yeah, no argument here.
So, what takes you about 2.5 hours to watch the movies, the characters in the movie take months to complete, which leads me to my first point, and that God exists outside of time and space, a concept that typical Judeo-Christians don't really think about that much or kind of ignore. And a bit of a difficult concept to grasp your mind around.
Well, I guess you're kind of right. So often we hear that we were made in God's image, and so we tend to imagine him being more like us than us being like him. But how does that tie into our modern world?
Well, we have two examples in the Bible that refers to a day being like 1,000 years to God and 1,000 years being a day. The first one is in Psalms 90 verse 4, and the second, 2 Peter 3:8. And a lot of people like to think of this referring to what God can do in a day is equivalent to what man can do in 1,000 years. But that isn't what this verse is referring to. So if you were to say, oh, it's 1,000 degrees outside, well, you don't literally mean that it's 1,000 degrees outside. You are using a simile to express how hot you feel. So if you sub out a million or a billion, the phrase would still have an effect. But if you take those away, then that becomes a metaphor. But in either case, this number is being used as a placeholder. So let's apply this to the Bible. 1,000 years, or if you believe in evolution, a billion, is like a day. That is a simile. And in the beginning, God created everything we know in 6 days, metaphor.
So why isn't that something more widely broadcast among Christians?
I don't think it's anything malicious. A lot of times we like to view things in our very specific worldview and take the things that we want away from it. But at some point you have to acknowledge the other side. And I would say that blind faith is just diet fanaticism, and I am not a fanatic, and I do not believe that God wants us to be a fanatic either. So with that in mind, I think it's important for us to occasionally reevaluate our beliefs, and sometimes, and most of the time, your faith is stronger after that.
While I am a fan, or I am a believer in evolution, I do kind of understand how this idea that this supernatural being can display all of its power by creating everything that we know and love in such a short amount of time. It would be hard to discount.
Well, if it doesn't sit right with you, then maybe I can put it in a different perspective. So the Bible talks about how God holds the world in his hands. We can understand that, we can grasp that, because we can hold microorganisms in our hands, and we recognize that the lifespan of these microorganisms are different than our own. They're shorter. And so that is something similar that is happening with us and God. Maybe let me put this in a more fun way. Have you ever seen the live-action Grinch with Jim Carrey? Well, the framing device of that is the snowflake is falling from the sky, and generations of generations live on this snowflake that's falling. But that obviously implies that time works a little bit differently on the snowflake than it does outside of it.
Well, for all we know, they could be our distant cousins on the evolutionary tree.
Yeah. Speaking of evolution, I find it so funny that I feel like people use the same arguments on both sides. And so if somebody ever asks you, like, show me a species evolving to another species, well, just simply respond to them and ask them, well, why don't you just show me every single species that has ever existed? And just walk away, because over, I want to say 90% of animals that have ever existed are extinct. And we are discovering new species every single day. So maybe we didn't come from apes. But I would say the burden of proof is more on scientists. And so I would encourage people to really look inside themselves and think, God has never tempted us. And so why would he tempt us with science?
Interesting. Dude, the show just did not go the way I thought it was going to today.
What happened? I mean, I thought, it's going okay.
Just everything was off. Like, I don't even know.
Well, I'm sure you did your part. Sorry your show didn't work out.
If I had $1 for every time someone said that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'd have exactly $19.